Angie, are you ready to jump into a F.A.C.E experience right now?
Oh, for sure. I was born
Uh,
ready.
Good one, Angie. All right, so welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm
Welcome.
excited to be here. Lots,
All right.
lots of stuff going on, it feels like. But
Yeah, and I really want to talk to you because, I've been kind of pounding the table at the grains that everyone should go out and buy a silo and take delivery of grains because these prices may not be here that much longer. Definitely, the beans have been the star of the show. What's behind this move in, grains being under pressure? Was it the strong dollar that's no longer there? But the beans
yeah,
look like they're trying to break out here, Angie, on a weekly basis.
yeah. Well, beans have a little bit of a unique story right now, just simply because we have a situation in Argentina with a pretty significant drought that's developing,
Okay.
and so what we've seen, and now are the bulk of Argentina's production season falls basically January through March. So
All right.
from an overall standpoint, when it comes down to it, we still have some time to see some corrections. And the thought is that we see La Nina break down eventually, and that weather kind of improve. But as it stands currently, their production is being threatened by a pretty massive drought happening in the region, and just really some extreme heat this week, dryness, things of that nature. And so Argentina is the largest meal exporter in the world. They actually basically double the US when it comes to meal exports. The US
Wow.
outproduces them, but we use a lot of it domestically. And so with
Wow.
Argentina, the question becomes, do they back out of the world export market when it comes to meal? Do you see China come to the US and try to access some supplies? So when you look at
Interesting.
soybean meal right now, that market's rallied $41 here in the last week, and 16 and a half of that came yesterday. So
Sounds
it
like
is pushing. Yeah,
gasoline and crude.
yeah.
The meal's leading the whole complex. Why don't you tell our viewers what meal is used for?
So
Soybean meal.
soybean meal is a heavy protein feed source. So
Okay.
basically, a lot of it is fed to all livestock. Anything that needs to eat and grow eats soybean meal in some sort of capacity, I guess. Maybe not 100%, but it's a pretty common feed ingredient. It's probably the most common, and it's just a byproduct of what you get when you crush soybeans. So, soybeans really, from an overall fundamental standpoint, it may not be exceptionally bullish, with the big Brazilian crop potentially coming on, but the product's been leading the way. We had soybean oil first leading the way, and now we've got the
Yeah.
meal running the show, and so it's been fun to watch, and it's been great for farmers to kind of grab some of the marketing opportunities that they may have thought passed them by.
I look at a monthly chart of beans and I see one drive, I see two, I see an incomplete pattern that
Mm-hmm.
uh, opens my eyes to the possibility that a new high over 18 is viable in the months ahead or the years ahead. So, why don't we talk about how wheat has really been underperforming because, all the fundamentals I read, based upon, the bread belt in the grain belt in Ukraine, is that the crop's going to be down another 40% next year. And all kinds of grain production levels have been cut because of the warm weather in Europe. And I believe it was India has shaved 10 tons off global production. So there's all these weather events happening around the world, and you just brought up another one, Argentina. Why is wheat under pressure here, Angie? You know, uh, could it
Yeah.
be just what is it?
Well, Russia has a lot of it, and a chunk of it has come because the Ukraine plants, or the bulk of winter wheat's planted in the fall. Ukraine plants the bulk of their wheat as winter wheat. So it was planted, in the fall of 2021, ahead of the invasion by Russia. And so
Right.
the bulk of Ukraine's wheat area, one third of it, or not the bulk, excuse me, one third of Ukraine's wheat area sits, basically behind where Russia had invaded, or sits in the area that Russia
Right.
had invaded. And so Russia, um, and there's a certain Russian ag analysts that'll argue with me to define what Russia means in this sentence. But basically, Russia, it's estimated that they kind of took and are exporting, around 6 million metric ton of wheat out of that region, as their own. That can't count for Ukrainian production, obviously, because Ukraine's not the one that's marketing it. But then on top of that, Russia had a record large crop last year, and they're really kind of pushing their export capacity.
They need the cash to finance the war.
Exactly. And the UN's been pushing that you need to kind of facilitate these open, grain pipelines. And so there's this idea that even if you were to see some sort of interruption, similar to what we saw there when Russia withdrew in late October, early November, when they withdrew from that Black Sea corridor, and you see the move higher that we had, it lasted for about 3 days. And so there's just kind of this sort of assumption that, the production's down out of Ukraine. There's some issues in Argentina, but at the same time, you have another record crop coming out of Australia. The European wheat crop was hurt, but much of the heat and dryness came in mostly to affect their corn crop, because European wheat exports have actually been up substantially. Now, they've probably exported themselves out of, surplus wheat, so to speak. So the question now becomes, if the dollar were to continue to weaken, which a lot of folks aren't necessarily seeing that, and I'm in that camp where I think the dollar finds support and kind of remains a little bit strong. But if you were to see the dollar continue to weaken and our logistical capacity kind of improve as you see the river levels come back up, you could see U.S. wheat become competitive in the global market, which would obviously probably send us back towards $8 to $8.50, relatively quickly. But one of the biggest things that we're seeing is just overall wheat demand as a whole is starting to slow, or at the very least, you aren't seeing the kind of concern over a loss in supply availability. You aren't seeing global end users just clamor all over themselves out of fear of not being able to access supplies. And that's the same, in basically any commodity right now. And so just that fact alone is keeping some pressure on wheat. But
China was a big buyer of wheat for many years, up until the pandemic.
No, they're still buying a good amount of wheat. They had switched over and started making some purchases of broken rice, but India banned that as soon as they caught on to what China was doing. But I feel like China, and Russia have a relatively close relationship. And so you're probably seeing China source a good amount of their wheat relatively cheaply from Russia. And that's just kind of helping alleviate some of their needs to turn elsewhere, because Russia had 101 million metric ton crop, if you believe, their analysts, and there's other traders around the world that believe it. The USDA is lagging in that simply because they're still honoring February 24th boundaries in Ukraine. So they're not really counting that wheat that was lost necessarily. So the USDA is kind of lagging on that estimate. But, to put that into perspective, that's, substantially higher than what their previous record crop was. So it's an interesting dynamic that the country that we don't really want to be dealing with actually has the most available, plentiful, and cheap wheat supply, as it stands currently. So it's just kind of this sort of tug of war over where we need to go fundamentally. But I feel like wheat is way oversold, but no one seems to care.
Yeah, well, they will. All you need is a green weekly candle, and I think you have a bottom. You mentioned La Nina in relation to Argentina, and that it may dissipate. What if it doesn't? Is there the potential for the U.S. Grain belt to be affected? I've seen years where La Nina has caused excessive dryness. Maybe the drought we have here in the West, I'm in California, spreads to the Midwest if La Nina persists.
Well, you've seen that drought. We saw some substantial production losses in the Southern Plains this year as a result of La Nina staying relatively entrenched in the weather patterns that we had seen. So that's why you've seen Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma. You look at the drought map, you can see that all the way up into Nebraska, into Iowa, you dealt with some pretty extreme drought. As a matter of fact, drought spread across, I think at one point it was up to 70% of the grain belt was under some sort of classification of drought.
Wow,
If La
I didn't
Nina
know
does
that.
break down, it's supposed to help open up some of that atmospheric flow that could bring some moisture our way. But right now models show that it should as we work into January. But we played that game before. We've been told La Nina is going to break down at least once, if not twice, over the last 3 years. And we're now entering into our third winter season with La Nina present. So
Is that a record, some kind of record? What's the longest stretch
I
of
think
La
this is
Nina?
it. I think this is it. Yeah, I think
Another,
it
you know
is.
how many times unprecedented comes up when you talk about things nowadays, or
Oh my goodness, I
something?
know.
Yeah, it hasn't come up and hasn't happened in a
We've
hundred
never seen this
years.
before. Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty common story for the last 2.5, 3 years. But
Yeah,
yeah, so La Nina breaking down is going to be super important. There is some talk that you'll see La Nina not only break down, but transition to El Nino. El Nino is far more compatible to global grain production
right.
than anything. And so
Yeah,
if we were to see that happen and it were to happen by next spring, then you could see a pretty sharp transition away from worrying over crop production to wondering where we're going to put it all. But obviously that takes a lot of time for us to get there. And the weather forecast is probably going to change a million times before we do.
okay. What a great summary of grains. Anything specific to corn that you want to touch upon, Angie?
Yeah, I mean, our biggest thing right now is corn exports are running about half of what they were a year ago. China is looking to source a pretty substantial amount of corn out of Brazil. The question now becomes, though, we are seeing import margins improve in China to where they could start bringing U.S. corn in. And so, obviously, sales have been slow because of the strong dollar and because of our currency conversion and competitive, supplies out of Brazil. And so now we're going to be watching really closely to see if we start to see some inquiries from China, march forward now that there's positive import margin.
Yeah,
So that's going to be something to stay tuned and pay attention to.
yeah, because technically it looks like this would be a correction that long-term technicians would be looking to enter on the long side from the rally we had from last summer to the recent highs. So
Yeah.
between here and 620, and then you're wrong under 580 for a potential position on corn. I would rank relative strength, of course, beans leading the way, followed by corn and then wheat. You
Mm-hmm.
see it that way?
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Wheat has been the dog. And so it's drug corn with it, but corn's also had its own story with poor exports and things of that nature. So definitely been something it will be something to watch.
Yeah, I mean, what you do with what's happened recently is really important to the whole picture. I mean, who wants to have bull markets in grains based upon growth, which leads to suffering? So, but we have to, be aware of the trends. And if you like the grains, I think they're a great technical market to trade. In my view, I've always liked the way they chart, and Angie could be really a good source of information, as she's demonstrated today. Do you have any kind of letter to keep people in
Yeah, you can find me
touch?
on Substack now, at Goddess of Grain. You can just check it out there. I'll link it on my Twitter account too. It's on my pinned post. But if
Okay.
you want to reach out to from the website, we can get you set up that way as well.
Okay, Goddess, I bow to you for coming here and gracing us with all your wisdom about agriculture, Angie.
Well,
Really
thank you for
appreciate it.
having me. I always enjoy it.
All right, Angie. Have a great holiday season. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
You too.
And
We'll see you after. We'll see you
yeah,
after the first of the year.
I think we'll know whether or not La Nina is going to be here or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
can't wait to get some answered questions, only to have more unanswered ones.
Thank you,
So,
Angie.
thank you.
Appreciate your time. Angie Setzer, everyone, follow her on Twitter at Goddess of Grain. And that's going to be a wrap today, everyone. You could join the team in about 25 minutes on the morning edge. Remember, don't just count your bushels, count your blessings. And we'll see everyone tomorrow. Thanks again, Angie.
Hey traders, this is Blake Morrow with ForexAnalytix. Thanks for stopping by our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like these videos, share them, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the content that we provide here for free. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video. you.